Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, August 24th, 2023. Russian President Vladimir Putin offers his condolences to the families of those who died in a plane crash in Russia yesterday, including Russian mercenary group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin. While Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder is asked point blank if President Putin assassinated Prigozhin in retaliation for his leading a failed insurrection in June. Today is Ukraine Independence Day. The United Nations Security Council meets on the war in Ukraine. Very differing views from the ambassadors from the United States, Russia, and Ukraine. Republican U.S. presidential candidates who debated last night in Milwaukee try to continue the momentum in interviews today. We'll hear from Vivek Ramaswamy, Mike Pence, Christie, Tim Scott, Ron DeSantis, and Nikki Haley, and talk with Axios reporter Alex Thompson, who was covering the debate, about how it will affect the race for Republican presidential nomination. And former President Donald Trump will be surrendering tonight at Fulton County Jail in Atlanta, booking and processing on the state charges of conspiring with 18 co-defendants to try to overturn the 2020 presidential election results in that state when he lost to Democrat Joe Biden. And we start with Russian President Vladimir Putin making a televised address. AFP reports an investigation is underway into what caused Wednesday's crash, which came exactly 2 months after Wagner's short-lived rebellion against Moscow's military leadership, and that Putin said, first of all, I want to express words of sincere condolences to the families of all the victims. He said, I knew Yevgeny Prigozhin for a long time, since the early 90s. He was a man of complicated fate, and he made serious mistakes in his life, but he achieved the right results. And that Putin went on to mention Prigozhin's work in Africa, where Prigozhin claimed to be earlier in the week, and where the Wagner Group maintains a significant military presence, saying, as far as I know, he just returned from Africa yesterday and met with some officials there. And Putin said an investigation into the crash will take some time. It will be conducted in full and brought to a conclusion. There is no doubt about that. And this comes just 2 months after Yevgeny Prigozhin led a failed military coup in Russia. Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder asked about this at his news conference.
On the plane that was carrying Prigozhin that went down in Russia, was it a bomb that took the plane down?
So a couple things. I know there's a lot of interest in this topic. I'll say right up front, first of all, our initial assessment is that it's likely Prigozhin was killed. We're continuing to assess the situation. We don't have any information to indicate right now. The press reporting stating that there was some type of surface-to-air missile that took down the plane. That we assess that information to be inaccurate. Again, nothing to indicate, no information to suggest that there was a surface-to-air missile. But beyond that, I'm really just not going to have any further information.
What was it, something that came internal from inside the plane?
Again, I don't have any additional insight to provide on that. Thank you. Oren.
I just want to check the first thing you said. Our initial assessment is that it's likely Prigozhin was killed. You mean killed intentionally, a la this may well have been an assassination attempt?
Killed in this airplane.
He was on board. And what leads you to believe that? What information do you have to suggest that he was on board? Or is this based on the fact that you have no reason to doubt Russian reports?
Yeah, I'm not going to go into the specifics of how we gather information other than, again, our initial assessment based on a variety of factors is that he was likely killed.
But not just based on Russian statements, I would imagine.
Based on a variety of factors. Thank you. Missy.
Just two clarifications and then a question. Just to make sure that I understood the answer to Oren's follow-up. So you guys are not willing to say that you believe it was an assassination attempt. You're just being neutral on that right now. Is that right?
Look, we're continuing to assess the situation. I'm not going to have any further information on how or why the airplane crashed.
Pentagon Press Secretary and Air Force Brigadier General Pat Ryder at a Defense Department news conference. Interfax news agency writes that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told reporters in Kyiv that his country played no role in the plane crash in Russia that killed Yevgeny Prigozhin. He said, we have no relationship with this. Everyone understands who has a relationship. General Ryder also announcing today the U.S. will begin training Ukrainian F-16 fighter plane pilots in September. Today is Ukrainian Independence Day, celebrating 32 years since Ukraine became an independent country with the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991. The U.S. State Department also announcing today 13 people and organizations, it says, are connected to Russia's alleged war crimes of forced deportation of Ukrainian children will be sanctioned. And at the United Nations in New York City, the Security Council, chaired this month by the U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, held a hearing.
On this day in 1991, Ukraine declared its independence from the Soviet Union. That same week, Ukraine notified the United Nations of its independence, based on the right of a nation to self-determination in accordance with the Charter. But 32 years later, today, Ukraine's very existence is under attack. For a year and a half, Russian forces have waged a full-scale war on the Ukrainian people. President Putin thought his war of choice would be quick and easy, that the Ukrainian people would wave a white flag in surrender, that somehow his forces would be greeted as liberators. But he was in for a rude awakening. Ukrainians have courageously fought back to defend their country's sovereignty, to defend their freedom, their democracy, their culture. And Ukrainians are fighting valiantly to defend and return Ukrainian children who've been forcibly transferred or deported to Russia, Belarus, and Russia-occupied territories. Children are literally being ripped from their homes in the year 2023 by a country sitting in this very chamber, by a permanent member of this council. This is straight out of a dystopian novel, but this is not fiction. Colleagues, this is not fiction. This is real life. While estimates vary, and we heard lots of numbers from our briefers, we know that since February 2022, Russia has forcibly transferred or deported thousands of Ukrainian children, including babies as young as 4 months old. And we know Russia has forcibly transferred or deported Ukrainian children as far back as 2014.
The U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, at a UN Security Council meeting on Russia's war in Ukraine today at the UN in New York City. Russia's ambassador to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, as he had in previous meetings, saying today that Ukraine's treatment of Russian-speaking Ukrainians going back many years made Russia invade 18 months ago, although he calls it a special military operation, and that it's the U.S. and other Western nations' continued military support of Ukraine that is prolonging the fighting and the suffering. You'll hear the voice of the United Nations interpreter for the Russian ambassador.
American and Western colleagues generally say that we would not find ourselves in this position had Russia not begun the special military operation against Ukraine. However, the tragedy of this country began long before, when the West chose Ukraine as a pawn to fight against and to weaken Russia. We would not find ourselves in the situation if the Kiev regime had not begun in 2014 a war against its own Russian language citizens in the east of the country. We were compelled to come to the defense of women, children, the elderly who were being destroyed by Ukraine after Ukraine and its Western sponsors unequivocally refused to comply with the Minsk agreements, which were endorsed by the UN Security Council. Moreover, as we know perfectly well today, for all of these years, this document was used as a mere smokescreen for Ukraine's preparations for war with Russia. Our country, to the last moment, leveraged the diplomacy to address the situation. For many years, we called, including in this hall, for implementation of Minsk. In late 2021, we accepted an unprecedented proposal for security safeguards with Western states. All of these were rejected, and Ukraine openly prepared for the forcible seizure of DPR and LPR. Russia could not allow this or tolerate it, nor could we reconcile ourselves to the entrenchment on our borders of the Russophobic neo-Nazi regime, which posed a direct threat to Russia. Distinguished colleagues, today's meeting, as we know, was timed by the United States and allies to coincide with Ukrainian Independence Day. On these days, generally, certain stock is taken and successes, achievements are highlighted. So what can today's Ukraine boast about? Let us attempt to calculate what lies on the surface. Of course, the main so-called achievement is the real totalitarian dictatorship, which is strengthening with each day, where dissent is prohibited, opposition is prohibited, history is being rewritten, and state policy has incorporated the glorification of Nazis and Hitler's henchmen. We are aware of tens of thousands of Ukrainians who are arrested merely for viewing Russian websites, listening to Russian music on phones, reading Russian books. Everything linked to Russia was declared to be hostile in that country long before our special operation.
That's the interpreter for Russia's ambassador to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, at today's UN Security Council meeting in New York City. Ukraine is not currently a member of the UN Security Council, but was allowed to take part in today's meeting on this 32nd anniversary of Ukraine's independence. The Ukrainian ambassador to the UN is Sergei Kilitsia.
Madam President, today Ukraine marks the 32nd anniversary since its independence was restored. As President Zelensky has said today in his address, 32 years of uninterrupted independence, which will endure, which we will not allow to be torn apart, and which Ukrainians will not lose grip on. As follows from the Act on the Independence of Ukraine of August 24, 1991, this step was triggered by, I quote, the mortal danger that hung over Ukraine in connection with the coup d'etat in the Soviet Union on August 19, 1991. The proclamation of independence also continued the 1,000-year tradition of state building of Ukraine. It has always been a matter of national pride that our independence was restored peacefully, and Ukraine has eagerly taken the path of democratic development as a peace-loving nation, reliable partner, and friendly neighbor. However, mortal danger is again hanging over my country, and it comes from the same place, the Kremlin. It denies us our right to live as a sovereign nation. It denies us the right to live as a nation, and finally, it denies us our right to live as human beings. The only role that Russia assigns to Ukraine, a founding member of the United Nations, is the role of lawless colony where the local population either bows to forceful Russification or faces deportation and repressions. We have opted to fight to defend our independence, our freedom, and the future we will choose ourselves.
The Ukrainian ambassador to the United Nations, Sergei Kilitsia, at today's Security Council meeting on Ukrainian Independence Day at the UN in New York City. Russian state media TASS reports a Russian district court ruled today that Wall Street Journal reporter and U.S. citizen Evan Gershkovich will remain in jail another 3 months through the end of November. He's been charged with espionage. The U.S. State Department has designated him wrongfully detained. Wall Street Journal with a statement today, our colleague and distinguished journalist Evan Gershkovich appeared for a pre-trial hearing where his improper detention was extended yet again. We're deeply disappointed he continues to be arbitrarily and wrongfully detained for doing his job as a journalist. The baseless accusations against him are categorically false, and we continue to push for his immediate release. Journalism is not a crime. That statement from the Wall Street Journal. This is Washington Today, and now to the 2024 U.S. presidential election race. Last night was the first Republican primary debate held in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, organized by the Republican National Committee and broadcast by Fox News Channel. And after the debate, both last night and into today, many of the 8 candidates who took part giving their assessment of their and their opponents' performances. Vivek Ramaswamy telling reporters Wednesday night that he won the debate.
I spoke authentically, and I didn't come with canned slogans. And the reality is, it's good. You know what? If you're not willing to face off authentically with your fellow compatriots on the debate stage, or NBC News, or wherever you all are from for that matter, you're not ready to sit across the table from Xi Jinping. And I will handle Xi Jinping the same way that I will be handling my fellow politicians on that stage, which is to say with authority and with strength. And I take a lot of those attacks as a badge of honor. And I also want to say this, that they're good people. Right? I'm going to need many of those people on that stage in different roles in reviving our country. But when it comes to the White House, it will take an outsider. I think we established that tonight. And I was honored to come out, I think is, I think clearly the winner of this thing, just to be really honest of it. My first time ever on a debate stage, I was prepared for this to be a warm-up. The fact that we came out as victorious as we did is really an honor, something that propels me and gives me a sense of duty to see all this all the way through to a landslide in the general.
Republican presidential candidate, businessman Vivek Ramaswamy, Wednesday night in Milwaukee after that debate. The Washington Post reports that with one indicator, he was definitely in the lead: online activity. The article reads, analysis of Google search interest, a good proxy for evaluating which debate participants triggered the most curiosity of viewers, indicates that no one saw a consistent level of interest equivalent to Ramaswamy during the debate's 2 hours. Another candidate on that stage, Mike Pence, a former vice president, during the debate challenged Vivek Ramaswamy, claiming he was too inexperienced for the job of president. And today, Mike Pence was interviewed on CNN.
You say he's a rookie, on-the-job training. Your last boss was a rookie. He had on-the-job training, a businessman who had never been elected, who had no foreign policy experience. Why is it disqualifying for Vivek Ramaswamy and not for Donald Trump in 2016?
Well, I think it's we're living at a different time. I mean, President Joe Biden has weakened this country at home and abroad. The disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan has emboldened the enemies of freedom. We have war raging in Eastern Europe. China continues to menace in the Asia-Pacific. And here at home, the runaway spending under the Biden administration launched the worst inflation in 40 years. Their war on energy has gasoline prices still up 60%. Their open borders policies created the worst border crisis in history. And I just wanted people to understand that I believe this is a time for proven and experienced leadership in Washington, D.C. I know how to get things done in Congress. I know the role of states, the vital role that our states play. And I know how an administration works, and bringing all that experience to bear, frankly, it's the reason why my wife and I stepped into this race. It's because we believe that to whom much is given, much will be required. And we've been blessed with opportunities to serve this country, and we just felt really a duty, Victor, to step forward and offer our experience to meet the challenges following the failed policies of Joe Biden and the Democrats in Washington.
Republican presidential candidate and former Vice President Mike Pence on CNN this morning. With a closer look at the day after the first Republican presidential candidates debate, joining us on the phone from Milwaukee, where the debate was held, Alex Thompson, national political correspondent for Axios. Thanks for being with us. What changes might we see in the Republican primary race after this first debate?
I mean, the first big change is you're going to see Vivek Ramaswamy not only get a lot of press attention, a lot of scrutiny. I imagine he's also going to raise a lot of money. And I think you're also going to see a lot of the campaigns continue to attack him, just as they did last night. I think that was not a one-off. I think he was able to joust and prove that he was able to be on that stage. When 6 months ago, no one knew who he was. And I think, it is going to be, a lot of the campaigns feel very threatened by Vivek Ramaswamy now. And you're going to see that play out in the next month here.
Former President Donald Trump, who wasn't at the debate, put out a statement saying that he won the debate. Up till now, it was Donald Trump in the lead, and any differences among the other candidates were secondary in the news. But Wednesday night, that's what there was mostly. They were going after each other. How does that potentially change the race?
I mean, it changes the race in that it doesn't change the race, in that nobody really distinguished themselves as sort of the clear Trump alternative. If anything, it became a little bit more muddled, and any sort of muddle in the field means that Trump is going to win this nomination. Now, what a lot of these candidates are hoping for is that over the next 4 to 5 months, one candidate is going to emerge as the clear alternative to Trump. And then after Iowa and New Hampshire, everyone will be forced to drop out. and then Trump cannot win or might not win in a one-on-one battle. That's sort of a bank shot, a rebound, and then a put back in, to win the nomination. But, last night was very interesting in terms of it changed the dynamics among that group of candidates, but it did not change the biggest dynamic of this race, which is that Trump is the front runner and he remains the front runner.
What issues dominated the debate, and have they been the same issues that have been in the campaigns up to this point?
It's a really interesting question. There were some people that sliced the debate, by minute on issues. So the issue that they talked the most about actually was abortion and abortion rights. And now is a conflict in which there are actually real divisions within the party on the best way to go. Obviously, given the way the 2022 midterms went, there's a lot of debate in the Republican Party about whether or not you continue to have a national agenda on abortion rights or do you leave it to the states. There was serious disagreement between the candidates. I wouldn't say that's something that comes up a ton on the trail, especially not outside of Iowa. So that was very interesting. You obviously saw, the Ukraine-Russia war in terms of funding it, and should we continue to fund it? Nikki Haley was on, yes, we have to stop Vladimir Putin. He's a murderer, and Ukraine is a pro-American country. Vivek Ramaswamy basically said, this is not in our national interest. It doesn't matter. I mean, the war is consequential, but it doesn't matter to America's national interest. So you saw, I think, what this debate was really good at, I think, is it really poked at some of the inter-party divisions. Everyone agrees on the big things on the Republican side. They all think Joe Biden's a bad president. They all would do things differently. But this debate was really good at sort of poking at the differences within the party itself.
We're talking with Alex Thompson from Axios about the format of the debate. In your article at Axios.com, you called it a raucous affair, and I've seen that in other places as well. Do you think the format will stay the same for the next debate, or there might be some changes?
I think there will be some very small tweaks, some things that people learned in order to, make sure that people stay on time. But you have to remember, this debate was hosted by Fox News. The next debate is hosted by Fox Business. So the same people are controlling it. I think I'm talking to Fox people. They felt pretty good about how things went last night. I would imagine there aren't going to be any dramatic changes.
Any whispers of any candidate dropping out yet? Maybe one that was not on the debate stage last night?
No whispers at all. I think, what's going to be interesting, though, is to some of these other the lower polling candidates, I'm thinking Asa Hutchinson and Mike Pence, do they make it to the next debate stage, which requires 60,000 donors? And if they don't, will they drop out? I think those are the candidates to watch out for the most. I think, Doug Burgum, the governor of North Dakota, is not very well known, but he is, very wealthy and can, self-finance his race. I think Nikki Haley certainly made her way to the next debate. She is also one of the other candidates that has financial limitations. And so she really needed to have a good debate, and she got herself a little bit more time. So I guess the short answer to your question, Asa Hutchinson, Mike Pence are at the most risk, but I would be very surprised if not all of the same 8 candidates that we saw last night are not on the debate stage a month from now.
Alex Thompson, national political correspondent for Axios, joining us from Milwaukee the day after that first Republican presidential primary debate. You can find his stories at Axios.com and on X, formerly Twitter, at Alex Thomp. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Republican National Committee Chair Ronna McDaniel said in a Fox News interview today about Wednesday night's debate, "I don't think they talked about President Trump that much. That did surprise me. I thought that was going to be more of it. I just thought if he's the front runner, I was surprised they didn't talk about that more." It took until halfway through the 2-hour debate for Donald Trump's name to come up, and it was brought up by a moderator's question. And a New York Times breakdown found that the subject of Donald Trump took up 6 minutes and 50 seconds of the debate time. second only to abortion, 7 minutes and 54 seconds out of the 2 hours. Christie, former New Jersey governor, another of the candidates on the debate stage last night, was interviewed this morning on MSNBC.
How do you think that you did in the debate last night? And what did you think of the field without Trump in it?
Well, look, I felt good about how we did last night. You know, I wanted to make sure that everybody, both in that arena and much more importantly, all of the people watching at home understand that I'm going to stand up and tell the truth about where our country needs to go and about how Donald Trump has failed us and would fail our party if he were ever made the nominee again. But also talked about important issues. You know, I guess Wes must have turned in early last night. Didn't hear me talking about education. I was talking about that last night on the stage, talking about my trip to Ukraine and how important it was for us to stand against Vladimir Putin. And when Vivek Ramaswamy was just, you know, getting too out of hand, the moderators wouldn't try to control him, so I did.
Christie, Republican presidential candidate on MSNBC this morning. Another candidate who debated last night, Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, was interviewed today on Fox News.
One analysis put Mike Pence with the most time talked on the stage. That's not hard to believe. He had a lot of interruptions of other people. He kept doing that. 12 minutes, 26 seconds. In second place, Vivek, 11 minutes, 38 seconds. You, Senator, were in the bottom three with 7 minutes, 57. The New York Times calls you the happy warrior. Are you going to change anything about your debate tactics going forward?
I'm going to continue to make sure that I provide the American people with an adult in the room having a conversation about their priorities. Certainly, the more you interrupt, the more time you get, but frankly, the more that helps Joe Biden. What I'm going to do is focus on those issues that set captives free. I'm talking about a kid who's born in poverty, who realized the American dream, because America is the solution, not the problem. You heard people on the stage last night refer to America as a part of the problem because we're a nation in decline. We are a nation in retreat because Joe Biden has us as a nation in retreat. As the next president of the United States, I will be standing proud and strong on the fact that the windshield of America's future is a whole lot better than the rearview mirror of our past.
Senator Tim Scott, Republican from South Carolina, presidential candidate on Fox News today. The second Republican primary debate is September 27th. At the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute in Simi Valley, California. A Politico article writes that former President Donald Trump has qualified for the second debate, but has downplayed the idea that he will appear, posting to Truth Social on Monday that he will, quote, not be doing the debates. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Listening to programs on C-SPAN through C-SPAN Radio just got easier. Tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio. And listen to Washington Journal daily at 7 a.m. Eastern. Important congressional hearings and other public affairs events throughout the day. And weekdays at 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern. Catch Washington Today for a fast-paced report on the stories of the day. Listen to C-SPAN anytime. Just tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. An article from CNN this afternoon, former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows has surrendered to be booked on charges brought against him by local prosecutors in Georgia for his alleged role in schemes to overturn the 2020 election results in the state. Mark Meadows has been charged with 2 crimes, violating Georgia's RICO Act, an anti-racketeering law, and soliciting a public officer to violate their oath. He denies wrongdoing. The allegations mainly revolve around the ex-chief of staff's participation in the infamous phone call between Donald Trump and Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in early January 2021, when Donald Trump pressured him to find enough votes to make him the winner. CNN article continues, Mark Meadows has agreed to a $100,000 bond deal with prosecutors. According to court documents, he is seeking to have his case removed to federal court and had asked a judge to delay any surrender or arrest in the meantime, but the judge refused. In all, 19 defendants are indicted in Fulton County, Georgia in this case. They have until Friday at noon Eastern to surrender for processing. Former President Donald Trump posting today that he'll be arraigned at 7:30 p.m. Eastern tonight. Today, C-SPAN covered a conversation about this case with John Malcolm, former assistant U.S. attorney in Atlanta, and John Yoo, former deputy assistant attorney general in the George W. Bush administration. John Yoo begins.
It sounds to me like Fani Willis overcharged the case by throwing in RICO. And in a funny way, it is overshadowed the individual, because she also charges Trump and the others with individual criminal acts. And so if you had taken away Georgia RICO and she had just charged the individual criminal acts, I wonder what you think of those. So, for example, there's focus, of course, on Trump's conversation with Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State. That, to me, in some ways is the most damning, but also, I think, on the facts, most difficult of the charges, right? Because she's going to allege, she does allege, and she's going to try and prove in court that Trump tried to coerce him into basically making up fraudulent ballots, right? So find me 110,000 extra votes or something. If she had just charged him with that, and Raffensperger seems to be a cooperating witness. I mean, he taped the conversation, right? I mean, we should all, as prosecutors, have cooperating witnesses like Brad Raffensperger, right? I mean, he didn't even need to be told to wire wire. He did it on his own. But what do you make of that? Like that scene? What do you make of these individual charges against Trump, putting aside the Georgia RICO, which I agree it has no limiting. I think from a law teaching perspective, what I would say is the Georgia RICO statute charge has a no limiting principle to it. I mean, it's so open-ended. It's possible for me to charge any organization in some way with being a Georgia RICO enterprise. But if you put that aside, maybe the court knocks that out. Maybe Trump gets to appeal on that. What about these individual charges?
Well, again, I don't know about people who allegedly intimidated Ruby Freeman, and I don't know about the coffee guy. So there's that. So what the genesis of all of this, it seems, was this telephone conversation. Brad Raffensperger. And the reason why I think that it would be very difficult to charge him with that is I actually think that virtually every report of that conversation has been skewed against President Trump. Every single one of these reports, and you actually said it too, I don't fault you for it because you read this a million times, is that President Trump told the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, you need to find me, it was 11,500 some odd votes. Well, in a sense, Brad Raffensperger did Donald Trump a favor by recording this because, while it was not a perfect conversation, Donald Trump says he has perfect conversations. I went back through this transcript, and what does he say? He has four sort of references. He says at one point, we, meaning his legal team, we can go through signature verification and we'll find hundreds of thousands of signatures if you let us do it. So he's asking Brad Raffensperger to make records available to them. He then says, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have because we won the state. At another point, he says, I have to find 12,000 votes, and I have them times a lot. And then finally, what he says is because all we have to do, Cleta, that's Cleta Mitchell, who was one of his attorneys on the phone, because all we have to do, Cleta, is find 11,000 plus votes. At no point during this conversation does he say, Brad, you need to find these votes for me. And at no point does Brad Raffensperger go, Mr. President, what you are asking me to do is improper and I simply won't do it. So she could charge him. Certainly the media has charged President Trump by, to my mind, misreading this conversation. But she could have done that. But certainly RICO has all sorts of dangerous implications going forward.
John Malcolm is a former assistant U.S. attorney in Atlanta, now Heritage Foundation Institute for Constitutional Government Vice President, in a conversation with John Yoo, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, now University of California, Berkeley law professor. This was hosted by the Heritage Foundation. Donald Trump is facing 13 separate counts in Georgia, including racketeering and fraud and false statements, and will be booked tonight. He posted as he left New Jersey, his Bedminster Golf Club, 231 million views and still counting. He was referring to the interview that he did that played last night with Tucker Carlson, posted on X, formerly Twitter. Donald Trump goes on, the biggest video on social media ever, more than double the Super Bowl. But please excuse me, I have to start getting ready to head down to Atlanta, Georgia, where murder and other violent crimes have reached levels never seen before, to get arrested by a radical left, low-life district attorney, Fani Willis, for a perfect phone call and having the audacity to challenge a rigged and stolen election. The evidence is irrefutable. Arrest time, 7:30 p.m. That post by Donald Trump. Andrew Weissman is a former assistant U.S. attorney, also a former FBI general counsel in the Obama administration, and former lead counsel to the former special counsel Robert Mueller. He was part of a Brennan Center for Justice conversation on Wednesday about all the indictments Donald Trump is facing. Here he goes into some comparison between the Georgia case and the Justice Department special counsel Jack Smith's charges concerning alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election results.
There's a lot that is really in common between the federal so-called January 6th case and the state January 6th case. One has, obviously, the federal one has in some ways a broader lens. It does a deeper dive into what was happening at the White House, what was happening with Mike Pence, what was happening in the Department of Justice, and a bit of a deeper focus on what was happening outside of the states of Georgia. But the Georgia case is really remarkably similar, and it does a deeper dive into essentially taking us inside what was happening on the ground in a specific state, so that we could see the break-in into the electoral actual machines. We could hear about and read about the granular harassment of Ruby Freeman and Shay Oss. There was sort of more granular details about how a scheme that is alleged to have happened, orchestrated from Washington, got implemented on the ground. So I do think that they're similar. They have slightly different focuses. I think that the key difference is one that may become quite important, which is that the state charges against all of the defendants remain regardless of who wins the presidency, because those state charges cannot be federally pardoned by a president. And that is true even if some of the defendants are successful in moving the case from state court to federal court. The charges are still state charges, and they remain not subject to a federal pardon. I would make one brief caveat, which is that if Donald Trump, who is a defendant in the Georgia state case, were to win the presidency, there is a substantial legal argument that, and he certainly will make the argument, that the Georgia state case should be on hold as to him. But the case could still go forward as to the other defendants, and they would not be subject to either a stay or a pardon. So that, I think, is the sort of, to my mind, is the key difference. Obviously, if this Georgia case stays in state court, one other, I think, salutary benefit to the public is that Georgia state trials are generally televised. Federal trials are not televised. So the Georgia case, if it remains in state court, is one that all of us will be able to see for ourselves. And I do think that is going to be really important, very much, Michael, to your point about sort of how do we tackle the big lie on trial. I do think that I'm not naive. I don't think televising means that the magic wand suddenly means everyone sees the truth and recognizes the truth. But I do think that for many people, it will have that effect.
Andrew Weissman is a former assistant U.S. attorney, also former FBI general counsel, and former lead counsel to former special counsel Robert Mueller. On Wednesday, part of a virtual panel on Donald Trump's indictments. It was held by the Brennan Center for Justice. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a Republican presidential candidate fresh off of Wednesday night's presidential primary debate in Milwaukee, was asked this morning on Fox News Channel about the indictment of Donald Trump in Georgia, as Donald Trump is also running again for president.
You're second solid in almost every poll. You're focusing in Iowa. You're almost halfway through the counties in Iowa. The President of the United States got a slight surge after his last indictment. What do you think happens after he is arrested today?
You know, I don't know. I think that we're in a unique situation with all these cases. Hopefully there's no more, and we can just focus on the issues. I think we're just going to continue to be making progress in these early states. I think it's going to be really positive for us, but you got to earn it. You've got to go out there and work hard to do it. I'm a blue-collar kid. I mean, I worked minimum wage jobs to be able to put myself through school and do all this stuff. Nothing was handed to me, and that should be no different than the nomination for the Republican Party.
Trey Gowdy said, hey, listen, he's winning by 40 points. If you want him in the next debate, close the gap. How do you plan on doing that?
Well, first of all, he's not winning by that much in Iowa and some of these early states, but I think he made a mistake not debating. I think Republican voters expect you to show up and make the case. They don't think anybody's entitled to any of this, and so I think it's in his interest to debate the next time. I can tell you I'll be there, and we're happy to discuss all these important issues, but ultimately, it's not about my issues. It's not about some of these past things. It's about the country's future, and that's got to be the sole focus, and if we as Republicans are focused on that, holding Biden accountable, we are going to win. If we litigate the whole issue about what happened on January 6th, or all these, which is what the media and the Dems want, then Biden's going to be in his basement again, and he's going to get away with it.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican presidential candidate, this morning on Fox News Channel. Nikki Haley, former South Carolina governor, another Republican presidential candidate who debated last night in Milwaukee, was also asked today about former President Donald Trump's indictments. She was on ABC News' Good Morning America.
You were asked on the stage last night if you would vote for him for president, support him for president, even if he were convicted on felony charges. Why would you vote for a convicted felon to be president of the United States?
Well, first of all, he hasn't been convicted yet, but I also trust the American people. I don't think it's going to get to that point. I think Donald Trump's going to spend more time in court next year than he's going to spend on the campaign trail, and I think that Americans are tired of talking about the past. I think that they feel the fact that inflation has hit them hard. It's more expensive to buy groceries and gas. They can't afford child care. 50% of Americans can't afford diapers. They want transparency in the classroom. That's not happening. We see high crime. We see an open border, and they're worried about national security. Those are the issues real Americans want to talk about. They don't want to talk about a former president and the court cases that he has.
Well, they may not want to, but you were asked the question. You're the one who said, you raised your hand when you were asked, would you support him if he were convicted on those felony charges? I just simply asked you, why? Why would you vote for a convicted felon to be president of the United States?
Because I am not comfortable with the President Kamala Harris becoming president. I think we would be in a far worse situation. I don't even think it's going to get to the point that Donald Trump becomes president. I think that I'm going to be the nominee, and I think that we are going to win. And I think the fact that we're going to let these court cases play out, everyone's innocent until proven guilty, we'll see what happens. If he's guilty, he'll have to deal with it. But I believe the American people know what to do with that, and I trust them to do that. I don't think that we need to go and push something one way or the other. I think we need to be talking about what we're going to do about inflation and the border and national security. I think that the media spends way too much time talking about Donald Trump, and I think we need to talk about the fact that we need a new generational leader. We need someone who's going to take America to a better place. And it's time that we had term limits in D.C. It's time that we quit talking about the past, and it's time that we start talking about what the new solutions are for us going forward.
Nikki Haley, former South Carolina governor and now Republican presidential candidate, on ABC's Good Morning America this morning. An article at The Hill, House Judiciary Committee Chair Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, fired off a sweeping request for documents dealing with former President Trump's prosecution for election interference in Georgia, asking Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, a Democrat, to turn over all records related to the case. Sent just hours before Donald Trump is expected to surrender at the Fulton County Jail, the letter cites concerns about Willis's motivation in bringing the case and suggests her sprawling racketeering indictment against the former president and 18 others highlights, quote, the threat that such state prosecutions can pose to the operations of the federal government. The letter also asked whether Fani Willis at any point communicated with the team of special counsel Jack Smith, who earlier this month brought federal charges against Donald Trump related to his efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. That reporting from The Hill. Wall Street today, the Dow down 373, NASDAQ down 257, S&P down 59. And thanks for listening to Washington Today. You can sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories making news in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.